a walkthrough of a5power on ThunderCTF. And so you can see on the screen that on this project, I went through the setup of ThunderCTF. I enabled the detailed logging, and then I deployed the level. And as in previous levels for the CTF, you start with a set of access credentials for A5 access, and it's given as a JSON file where this is your service account key that you start with. And then the goal of the level is to find a file called secret.txt that's in a private storage bucket on the project. And so as with the other levels, we'll start by activating the service account that we've been given, the credentials of the service account. And you see that the service account is A5 access at our project name. And then you know that there is a secret in some storage bucket. And so you would first do a gsutil ls to see if you have access, and you see you have an access denied because this service account doesn't allow you the permission, or doesn't have the permissions to access any of the storage on the project. So we have to figure out a way of elevating this set of privileges. One of the things that we'd like to do is first figure out what permissions our service account does have access to. And so we have given you in this CTF the test permission script. So we'll just execute the test permission scripts, test permissions on the initial set of credentials. And we'll see when we test these credentials, you'll see we have all sorts of permissions to get cloud functions, list cloud functions, and moreover, this is the important one, we can set the source code of a cloud function and then update the execution of that cloud function. This allows us to upload any code into the cloud function service of our particular project. And so this is something that might be very useful to us to pivot around the project. So with these permissions, I can start by doing a gcloud functions list to see, well, what are the cloud functions on this project? And you see this is the name of one of the cloud function that we have deployed on this project. I can do a gcloud functions describe on this function to figure out, well, how can I invoke it? So you see that it had an HTTP trigger for it. This is the actual trigger to execute that function. I can basically click on it and see, oh, I have an error. I'm not allowed to get this thing. And as in other levels, like when you get this permission denied error, the actual endpoint is looking for some kind of authorization token to allow you access to this. So this is similar to many REST APIs where you're going to, in order to get access to that service, you need to present a valid set of credentials to it. Okay. So with this, we could actually curl this endpoint if we just do a curl of the trigger itself. So I'm going to copy this to get the same error message back. And then you can see this is giving me a forbidden error. Now we can, because this curl is being done with no identity token or access token, we actually have a service account that we have access to. We can print the identity token of the initial service account we have access to and see if it is authorized to access its own cloud function. And so we can do that in a number of ways. One way we can do this, well, first, we could run this command to get a copy of our identity token. So we could do a gcloud auth print identity token. And this actually goes to the metadata service that's running to get a copy of the identity token associated with the service account we've activated. And this is what we could then attach to a authorization bearer header on the curl request in order to present a credential that the cloud function can then validate to give me access. So one way to get this identity token and attach it into that curl command is to in the .h, so the .h flag on the curl will allow you to attach a header, an HTTP header to your request. So I'm going to attach a bearer token, and I'm going to ask it to supply as the token the output of the command I just ran above, and this will splice in the standard output right into this command, this curl command, so it can be used to attach an identity token to this particular request. And you see when I do this, I can actually get the cloud function to execute whatever code it had to run. And so this is this has allowed us to invoke that cloud function. Now we have been given permissions to set the source code of this function and to update the function. So we can craft our own function in order to execute arbitrary code as the cloud function service account. So we have A5 access, which is our service account that has all this deployment, these deployment permissions on cloud functions. But the actual function itself, when it executes, has a different set of permissions associated with it for the cloud function to access other services on the cloud project, and they're separate service accounts. And so one of the things we can do is that function is executing on a virtual machine, and if that function needs to go off of that virtual machine onto Google Cloud and access services such as storage bucket services, it's going to ask its metadata service to issue its access token in order to supply that to other API calls on the back end. This is very similar to what we just did in order to supply our own identity token to the cloud function. So then we can write some code that queries the metadata service, and I've already in this function directory written the code to do that. And this is something we give you. And so this is a special metadata URL. The metadata service has all sorts of things that you can query as from the cloud function in order to get things like your service account access token, which is basically at this special URL. Now, Google protects the metadata service from SSRF attacks by forcing you to attach a metadata flavor Google header. And so we can do this because we own the function itself. We can manually attach that header. And then we can write code that just hits this metadata URL, gets the token, and then passes it back directly to us. And so that's what this cloud function is going to do. And we're going to deploy this function on top of the hello world one, and then access it in order to get the identity token. Okay, so that's the function. And one of the things that you need to do with this function is also supply a requirements file that specifies any of the packages that your function relies upon. And if you remember in main.py, I'm using Python requests to basically perform the request to the metadata service. Okay, so then with these two files, that is basically what a cloud function needs for us to deploy onto the project. We do want to get our original function now, because now what we're going to do is we're going to do a deploy, and we're going to deploy onto this original function that we had that printed hello world. And so with this new function, I'm going to do a gcloud functions deploy onto that function. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to say the source code that I want to deploy on there is in this directory. Wait, I have to come up a directory. And then I can say the source code is basically in this directory. And then I can say I want the trigger. Let me copy and paste this rather than type this poorly. I want to have an HTTP trigger, and then I want the runtime to be Python 3.8. It's just a modern Python runtime. And then this is going to deploy my version of the function on top of the current version. This is going to take a couple minutes, so I'm going to pause the recording. Okay, so now you can see that this has deployed, has finished deploying, and it's got the same URL endpoint as we had before. And so we can then hit this with another curl command in order to see if we can get the access token of the cloud function that's running. So I'm going to reissue the, I'm going to reissue the curl command. Now, one of the things with Cloud Functions is it sometimes takes a while for this function to deploy. So if you hit this API endpoint and you get hello world again, you're just going to have to wait a couple minutes and keep on returning and hitting this URL until it eventually works. So that's basically what I'm going to do. I'm going to hit this Cloud Function, and as it turns out, this actually has been has updated, and it has spit out an access token from the Cloud Function that the Cloud Function is using for its accesses to the backend. And so one of the things we can do is see what permissions this particular token can get us. And so this is, I'm going to copy this token, and then I'm going to run that test permission scripts again on this particular token. And so when you do so, you can get the permissions of this particular token. And as you can see, this cloud function has permissions to get IAM roles, list IAM roles, and then update them. So this is a very powerful permission where you can update roles in the identity and access management service. And then moreover, it also has the ability to get the IAM policy of the entire project, because in order for you to want to patch roles with additional privileges or additional permissions, you have to find out the names of those roles. And so get IAM policy is another powerful policy that prints out all the permissions and the roles and the settings, the security settings of an entire cloud project. So we're going to use this token then to get the IAM policy of the project. And in order to do so, one of the things that the cloud does is that everything on the back end is just a REST API that you attach a token to in order to get access to whatever service you're looking to get access to. And so the IAM service is no different. And so it has this endpoint where you can ask for the IAM policy of the project by giving it a project ID. And in this case, our project ID is TCTF demo 1. So you can see I'll just pull that from my project that I'm running the level from. And then I can just attach the access token that the Cloud Function has given me. So that's this access token right here. And then using this, I can actually dump out the IAM policy of the project. And this should look very familiar to you because in the end, you have set this parts of this policy up. So for example, you set the detailed log configuration on all of these different services. And so that is indicated in the IAM policy. If you scroll up further, one of the things that you can see for this particular level, as I scroll up towards the top, you see these policy bindings for the initial access the initial service account that you were given access to, the A5 access service account, and you have the name of the role that is associated with this service account. And so with this, we can now we can attach different permissions because we have the IAM update permission. We can actually attach new privileges onto this A5 access account. And then here's another service account. So this is the service account that the Cloud Function is running with that has the IAM roles attached to it. And so these two service accounts, this service account credential could be used to update this one is effectively what is going on. And so just like we have an endpoint to get the IAM policy, we have an endpoint that can be used to patch the permissions on this role. Now, it does need, as part of this command, it needs the project ID that you're trying to patch this, patch the permissions before. So this is demo 1, and the role that you want to add permissions to, let's just add it to this this role that we started with. We could have added it to ourselves as well, but let's just do the initial service account, and then we can just supply the access token that we had before, which is right here. And then we can copy and paste this curl request to actually perform the operation on the back end. All right, so that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to execute this command, and then it's basically going to add these permissions onto the A5 access role. Okay, so then this operation might take a while to propagate, so I can basically and then one of the things that you might need to do is reactivate the service account to get a new token to update the permissions on this role. So that's what I'll do. Again, I'll reactivate the service account, and then what I'll do is I'll run the script's test permissions on this service account to see whether or not the permissions have been updated on this service account. And you can see it still has the original permissions on it, but then you see it now has storage buckets, access, the list, and the objects get and the objects list. So this, if you remember right at the beginning of this level, when I did a gsutil ls on this service account, it didn't work. But now, because we actually have these privileges attached to the service account, now you see that I actually do have access to listing the storage buckets. And I use this to list this particular bucket, which seems to be associated with my level, just to see what's in there. And then you can see that it has the secret.txt file that the level is asking me to exfiltrate. So I am going to copy it out of that bucket locally, and then I can access this to solve the level. All right, and then you would just take a screenshot of that to for your lab notebook. All right, so that is the level walkthrough. And so in the code lab, I ask you, after you go through the level, the first thing I want you to do is go and examine the log activity. And this is the summary, the log summary. And so the in your project, you can actually go to your overview dashboard and go to the activity. And I ask you to filter on configuration activity and data access activity. And so that's what you see here. It's been enabled, these two things. And then you can see, well, through this log, I want you to look for access to secret.txt, access to the the IAM role being patched, and the cloud function code being updated. So with this UI, you can see that, yeah, here is the activity for getting that secret. You can see this is the event that updated the role. So when I issued that patch command, it updated this role, and then you can see the details of what got updated. And so you can see the things that got added to this particular role. So that shows up in the log file. So this exercise is intended for you if you were to be, so if you weren't the attacker and you're the defender trying to do a post-mortem on what the heck happened to my project that got compromised, this is the kind of stuff that you would do to figure out, well, what did the adversary do? And so in that, in this particular log, you would see that, oh, they replaced the privileges on this service account. The other thing I want you to do is look for the event that where we updated the cloud function code itself. So that's where we exfiltrated the token. And that should be right here. And so you see, this is where I basically did a gcloud functions deploy using that code that I created in Cloud Shell. Okay, so that is this part of the forensic analysis. I want you to go through, so this is sort of a summary view of the activity that has happened on your project. Typically, you would actually go to the log explorer to navigate what has happened on the back end. And so this is the logs explorer, and you see it's got all of the events that have happened in this project, and it's classified based on the type of event that has happened. And so we ask you to find that exfiltration event and then take a screenshot that includes the service account used to access this bucket. So that's what we can do next. And so you see it's sitting right in front of us right here. We could also say, I'm only interested in storage bucket accesses, and then it would, show it right at the beginning, which is right here. So what we'll do is we'll expand out the this particular event, and you can see it was that initial credential that we attached new permissions to. That's the storage. That's the service account that was used to access the secret.txt. And of course, we tried this before, and it wouldn't have worked at the beginning. We had to actually patch the service account with an additional privilege in order for this to work. We can also filter by service account. So if I know that this is the problem service account, this was the service account that was used to exfiltrate the thing, I can go through its history and start tagging this as being the service account that we need to pay attention to for forensic analysis. So that's what I'm going to do next. I'm going to say show matching entries for the service account. And then you can see all of the different things that this service account did, including basically deploying the cloud function itself. So that's what this particular part is doing. Okay. Find the cloud function update event. So this is forcing us to basically apply filters by severity, and then in order to zero in on the actual event that did the update. So that's what we're looking for next. And so one of the severity levels is the notice severity. So when you do a cloud function update, this gives you this logs an event that is a notify event, and this is typically a higher level severity. And so you can see when I redeployed this cloud function, it was done using the A5 access service account. And then this is and it asks you, what is the service account key name that was used to perform this operation? So the log, if you expand out the log entry, you can actually, with the authentication information, figure out what the service account email address is that did this operation, and then the key name. So in this particular service account, I can issue multiple service account keys based on how the service account is being used. And if one of those keys has been compromised, I can actually get the ID of the key that was used. And so this is the ID, the key ID of the access credential that we start the level with. And so then you can go and invalidate that particular key in order to make sure that nobody can use this again. The next part of this is you can poke into the log entry to figure out where did the request come from, what's the IP address, what was the user agent that was used. And so here in the request and in the request metadata, you can see this is the IP address where this request came from. And then this is the user agent. So when we did the gcloud functions deploy, that actually is the access is done through the gcloud SDK. And that's what it indicates, that how how the operation, the user agent that was responsible for this. And this is the IP address of the Cloud Shell instance that we're running, that we use to do the gcloud deploy. What method name was invoked and what authorization permission was used. And so if you look, the method name is right here. It was the Cloud Functions update function. And then the authorization information you can expand out to see that the permissions that were needed for this operation was the Cloud Functions update. Okay, so that's pretty helpful. The next part of this is find the role update event in the logs. So I can clear this. And then I can show the query. I don't need to zero in on this access account again. What I need to do now is find the IAM role update event. And so you can actually click on the resource type to zero in on this event. So I'm going to click on the IAM role update. And you can see the update role event show up. And this is the one that I use to basically change the permissions on the A5 access role. And this is the information here. And so take a screenshot of the entry that includes the service account used to perform the operation and its request metadata. So you go to the authentication info, and this is using the service account associated with the function itself. So that's where emitting the token of the cloud function allows you to assume its role. And then what is the request metadata to see where it came from. And again, this came from an IP address is basically associated with your Cloud Shell instance. And because this is basically a different IP address than the Cloud Function IP address itself. So when I ran that curl command, it was a different IP address than this is the Cloud Shell IP address. Then you know that this might be suspicious, because if you have a Cloud Function and it's got a Cloud Function IP address, and then you see that an access using this role came from a different IP address, this is probably evidence that suggests that it didn't come from the Cloud Function itself. Take a screenshot of the resource name as well as the permissions added and removed. So the resource name, you can basically see that this was the resource that was updated. And then in terms of the permissions that were added and removed, if you go through the service data to figure out what data was changed, you see the permission delta. And so you see the added permissions were the get the list for the bucket and the get in the list for the objects in the buckets. And then these permissions were removed, the initial set of permissions that this access role had. And so that is basically this update event that allowed us to then get access to the secret